My name is Martha and I am a counseling psychologist. And today I would like to talk a little bit about loneliness. It's important to talk about how people have been experiencing loneliness and what they have been feeling, especially in the constant states of isolation and lockdown that have been required by governments all over the world. Well, loneliness is an emotion, it's a human emotion, and it's also a state of mind. So you feel lonely, that's why it's considered an emotion. And it's considered a state of mind because you bring yourself into that state of loneliness. The issue with loneliness really is that when people feel lonely, they can get into states of depression, for example, because they are seeking human connection, which is actually the definition of loneliness, is when you're seeking human connection and do not seem to be getting it as you need to. And when you have that empty feeling and you're feeling alone, that's where loneliness comes in. And as I was saying before, if you are in that state of loneliness, it can lead to things like depression because you're looking for that connection and you're not finding it. And to be honest, sometimes, because it's a state of mind, it can be brought about by certain personalities, for example, because people who are introverted, for example, tend to stay in their own spaces. And the more they stay in their own spaces, the more they are more likely to feel lonely. Because they're not looking out for that human connection. We are social beings. We were made to be together. We were made as packs, families. Connections is so important in humanity. So they're the group of people who are also very likely to experience loneliness, are people who suffer from low self-esteem because they are worried about how people will view them, how they look towards other people. They fail to seek the necessary connection that is required for just being with people and making the necessary connections. There are several negative effects that can come from loneliness. As I said before, it is a state of mind. So it is you who puts yourself in that state of mind by lacking to connect with other people. And sometimes what people can do is they can replace those feelings or try and avoid that feeling of emptiness by substituting it with something else, like for example, alcohol or drugs. Because you're feeling unwanted at that particular time, then you try and numb the feelings of unwantedness through drugs and alcohol. The other negative effects is just the more isolated you get, the more you remove yourself from human connection. And human connection is so important. And then it becomes sort of like a cycle. You feel lonely, so you separate yourself. And then the more you separate yourself, the more lonely you feel. And eventually it can lead to depression and even worse, suicidal thoughts and suicide itself. How do we prevent loneliness? During lockdown and COVID, it was unavoidable. We were being isolated, we were being put in our houses and told not to leave. Visits to the supermarket were limited, visits to friends were limited, social gatherings had been cancelled. So for such a situation, it was almost understandable that a lot of people experienced loneliness. However, I think that it's important to actively seek things that you can do in order to help with loneliness. Connection, as I said, is what's important to help with loneliness. And it is so important to actively seek out friends, actively seek out relationships that you are interested in. During the pandemic, it could have been through Google Meet or Skype or whatever other things that there are in social media to connect. But then now that we're out of the pandemic, it's time for us to start seeking out the friends who we haven't seen, look for those classmates who you haven't chatted with in a very, very long time, and just try and gain that connection again. Go find your relatives, visit, enjoy being in their company. The other way that you can do is volunteer, find a hobby, start working with other people, and as you work with other people, you can get those connections that are needed to form deep friendships and meaningful connections. Another way is, as I had said, hobby, and when people have a hobby, they're more likely to find other people who have interests in that, and through that connection they can be together and start to come out of that feeling of aloneness and emptiness. So I think it's also really important to recognize the effects of being lonely, because the more you recognize that you are lonely, then I think it's an indication that you need to change your lifestyle. If you are feeling lonely, the human connections are not being made, it means that you need to get yourself out there. Buy somebody a cup of tea. Look for, I don't know, 50 bob or 100 and just go and hang out with somebody. It doesn't even have to cost. You can go to a park, you can sit by a bench and you can just start chatting. You can invite that person over, but the important thing is recognizing that you need to change how you are connecting with people.